past the last house, past the rail yards, past the edge of town. They're hidden at the feet of ancient trees, sparkled a small green swamp. Past the last house, past the rail yards, past the edge of town. There, hidden at the feet of ancient trees, sparkled a small green swamp. The two oral readings I just demonstrated differed in their prosody. This means that I adjusted prosodic elements such as rate, pauses, intonation and volume to convey meaning and mood. We can hear from the first reading that my prosody didn't really reflect the intended idea of the sentence, and I didn't acknowledge the punctuation through my prosody. With the second reading, my use of prosody was more appropriate and showed a greater comprehension of the significance of the swamp. This is what makes prosody one of the three key elements of reading fluency. The elements of prosody: intonation, variation pitch, volume, loudness or softness of the voice, rate, speed of reading, pause, breaks between the phrases of sentences, and expression conveying emotion and tone. They transform text, making it interesting and engaging, but more importantly, it facilitates deeper comprehension and cognitive processing. This is achieved because when applying prosody appropriately, the reading mirrors natural spoken language that people encounter in their everyday life, from both one-on-one interactions and also the viewing of texts, whether it be movies or also listening to audio texts. Tim Brzezinski highlights that prosody is essential for developing good readers who not only read accurately and fluently, but also understand and enjoy the material that they read. Text choice. Now let's examine prosody in the context of my fluency lesson based on the mentor text Refugees by David Miller. To quote one of the leading fluency programs, 5 from 5, text chosen for fluency instruction should be at a level that students can read with few errors. As with beginning readers, the focus of fluency instruction for older readers is on rate and prosody rather than effortful decoding. With this in mind, David Miller's Refugees is an appropriate text choice for the students to practice their prosody because it offers complex sentences, a range of punctuation and character experiences, while still remaining easy to read for an average Year 6 student, without putting up the barrier of complex and unfamiliar words that they get stuck sounding out. The quote that I've included in my PowerPoint by Timothy Brzezinski supports this idea that sounding out individual complex words puts too much of a cognitive load on students, and the comprehension that they're required to demonstrate through their prosody can be lost. Even as an adult, if I were to read a scientific article full of complex chemical terms, I would likely get bogged down having to sound those out, and my comprehension and prosody would suffer completely. Teaching strategies. My lesson follows the explicit teaching model through the inclusion of clear learning goals, the I do, we do, you do lesson structure, think alouds, modelling, guided practice, and finally check for understanding. Clear learning goals make the lesson purposeful and allow for self-reflection and feedback from the teacher about progress. These are stated using Walton Wilf at the beginning of my lesson. I do, we do, you do. So this structure is followed by starting with modelling prosody by the teacher. It's followed by choral reading as a whole class, and then finally independent practice in pairs. The students will do that to apply their skills. The think aloud and the modelling are done during the I do, and that is when modelling prosody, reading the first few words of Refugees. The teacher will verbalise a thought process in regards to where the prosodic elements are added. This is so students are then aware of how to apply these elements themselves, and they can then demonstrate that in their presentations. The guided practice part of it, this is done in the We Do, and that is when we are doing choral reading. That is guiding the students, the teacher is guiding the students all reading together to copy those intonations, those inflections, and those prosodic elements. Check for understanding. The lesson concludes with a check for understanding through a self-assessment rubric that the students will complete at the end of the lesson activity. And then for the lesson conclusion, the students will give a thumbs up, thumbs in the middle, thumbs down, and that's so the teacher can gauge the students' confidence. Syntax and punctuation cues. My lesson focuses on complex sentences in the text refugees, and the teacher modelling prosody that responds to syntax or sentence structure and punctuation cues of that text. Teacher models prosody elements such as pauses, volume changes, intonation that respond to the commas, sentence clauses, and the vocabulary within that refugee's text. It is important that students have this modelled so that they can practice adjusting their own prosody based on those punctuation cues that were modelled to them. Goal setting. So the lesson needs to be clear about what elements of prosody the students need to work on, which was included in the Walton Wheel. Clear SMART goals will be set via the student's self-assessment rubric at the end of the lesson. As stated on my slides, those goals will need to be specific. They will read with appropriate expression, changing tone and pace. Measurable, they will record themselves reading and compare it to a rubric checklist or prosodic features. Achievable, they will practice reading aloud daily for 10 minutes using a text that they've already read before. Relevant, the goal will help them understand the emotions and meanings behind the text. And time bound, this will be done and achieve noticeable improvement in their prosody within 4 weeks, so over the 4-week lesson plans. And finally, progress is tracked through the self-assessment and teacher feedback based on their recorded readings, which they will continue to do. So linking my lesson to the Australian curriculum and the National Literacy Learning Progressions. This lesson really aligns with the Year 6 Literacy Content Descriptor, ACLY 1816, and that is stating students vary the conventions of voice volume, tone, pitch, pace. They also recognise the effects these have on the audience understanding and engagement. Likewise, the NLLP states that students read with intonation, expression, and use punctuation cues and comprehension to adjust their intonation to suit the author's purpose. And you can see with the NLLP that prosody, I've highlighted, is included in every level of the fluency section. Okay. Assessment. So during the introduction activity, the teacher will use formative assessment to gauge the student's understanding during the prosody activity game, where students will change their prosody to convey 2 separate meanings on the same line of text. A key component of my lesson is self-reflection, with students filling out self-assessment rubric at the end of the lesson after viewing their reading recordings. The teacher will offer feedback based on the recordings as a form of formative assessment to inform the future SMART goals for those students. Okay, ATL standards and what I've linked to my lesson. So, standard 2.2, content selection and organisation. I've applied this standard through creating a lesson that builds on prior learning about prosodic elements and applies the skills to a mentor text that students will be using over a series of lessons. The purposeful goal of these lessons is that students will demonstrate prosody in reading their own picture books that they create to engage an audience and their peers. So ASIL Standard 2.6, Information and Communication Technology, ICT. I've implemented the use of ICT through students using iPads to record their reading with prosody. This provides an effective method for those students to then reflect on the skills that they've used. And ASIL Standard 5.1, Assess Student Learning. So this also goes in line with using the ICT, because then the teacher can use those recordings to assess and target areas of need in certain students, as well as provide feedback and evidence to parents about their child's reading progress. Thank you for listening to my presentation on my prosody lesson plan.